Okay, so what I'm doing here is fitting the blades over yonder to the handles. So that includes boring out the bearing pockets here. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling these apart. I've been keeping them all screwed together so I don't mix the parts between the knives, because they are all hand ground, so the parts will not interchange perfectly, and I don't want that, so I keep them all screwed together. Got the clutch set on this so that I don't over torque the screws. So I'll pull it apart. Now what I need to do is measure the thickness of my backspacer and the thickness of my blade so that I can know exactly how deep I need to bore each bearing pocket. I know for a fact that my bearings over here are 92 or 0.0925 thick. I've mic'd them out on many different kinds and came up with about 925. So what I'm doing is take my calipers, wipe off the edges, check my zero. Just a quick note on calipers. These are just cheap Harbor Freight calipers. They're nothing special. I've got some Mitutoyo dial calipers and some depth gauges and stuff, but I use these just because it's fairly accurate. If you give the same amount of pressure when you push against the wheel down here, if you give the same amount of pressure or relatively close, you'll get the same amount of measurement. Now if you notice here, hopefully you can see this, let me look here. If I push hard, I can get myself a 5/10 out. If I loosen up, I can get a 0. So I always make a practice of wiping the jaws off, 0 out, and then measure my part with the same pressure that I put on it. Okay, so now back to this. This backspacer is exactly 220 thou thick. Well, I shouldn't say exact. As exact as those calipers will tell me. So down here, I doubt you'll be able to see this. Let me adjust my camera. And this is about 17 knives worth of math. I need a surface grinder, something fierce, so that I can only do one calculation and bore the bearing pockets, but this is how I roll. So, as I said, backspacer, 220 thousandths thick. Okay, my blade, roughly 188 thousandths thick. Now these all vary depending on how much I had to remove, how much material I had to remove to flatten these or take out any imperfections from when I got it. They're all pretty close because they were all, the whole plate was Blanchard ground before I got them, so they're all pretty close. So now I take out my trusty calculator, and what do we got here? We got 220 thousandths minus 0.188 equals 0.032. Divide that by 2, which will give me the amount of bearing surface that will be sticking above the surface of the frame. Now I know that my bearings are 192 thousandths thick or so 0.092 minus 0.016 gives me 0.076 boring depth. So I need to bore my bearing pockets so that these slide in here. I'll bore that pocket 76 thousandths deep. Then I will run over to the mill, and I have a 1/2 inch counter bore in here with a 1/4 inch pilot, and I'll touch off on every part and zero out my Z-axis on the top of each part and bore down on these two frames 76 thousandths. And then with any luck, I'll come back over here, put this thing together, and it'll move real free. So give me just a sec. Okay, so got my bearing pocket bored out here. Should be able to see that. And bearing drops in there. Voila, it's just barely above the surface. It'll be 16 thousandths above the surface. So what I do, grab myself a pivot, pop it in there, take a stop pin. These are 3/16 stop pins. I make this a light press fit. Pop those in there until it bottoms out. Toss in a bearing. Okay, double check that my stop pin slot is free and clear and not rubbing on the stop pin. Throw my other bearing on there. I've clearanced this hole. It's 3/16 loose fit for, or I guess slip fit you would call it, for this stop pin. So it's 188. This is a 187 thou stop pin. So grab my screw, toss these together. If I can get the screw to cooperate. Okay. Now, every once in a while you'll get one that'll be loose here, tight here. Usually ends up that the stop pin just got a little hung up in the hole, so it made the frames not parallel to each other. Just a light tap usually frees it right up. So we're good there. Then back spacer, and usually you know right off the bat if you got the measurements right, because the back spacer will be fairly tight to get in there, but not like horribly tight. If it's super loose, that means it's you didn't get your bearing pockets bored to the correct depth. If it's super tight, it means that you bored them too much. And then voila, got a little bit of rub with the, there we go, opens up, and it's centered. That's what we're looking for. So this one's good to go. Going to the next one. I'm going to work my way through. I got another probably 15 of these, I think. And then I'll go on to carbidizing the lock faces. I'll put all the detents in and set the detent pressure. I set them fairly light for thumb openers. And then I set them fairly tight for flippers, so the minis will have a fairly tight detent. I'll set the, I've also got to mill the stop pin track a little so that this blade drops down a little further. Open position is perfect. It's just the closed position needs to be adjusted just slightly. So I'll do that and work my way from there. Once I've got the basic mechanics down and all the knives open and close, at that point I will start cutting locks. I'll fit all these locks and then they all get worked on individually from that point. And that's it. So I'm going to try to finish these up tonight. See you later, guys. Alright guys, so I couldn't resist straying away from working production line style. I didn't finish this one. By no means is it finished. I don't have it sandblasted or tumbled or the blade finished or anything. It's I got the blade ground out. It needs to be acid washed still and tumbled. But I did pop the bearings in there, cut the lock, and set the detent. I don't have the detent set exactly where I want it yet. I think I'm going to set it just a touch harder, just so that these things fire like crazy. But this is something so you know what you're looking for in a flipper. How hard the flipper is going to flip is relative to how far forward the flipper is above the center line of the pivot, above the top of it. So this one is pretty far forward of it, kind of like my Kuwakin style. There's some other makers that do that also, push it far forward. A lot of this depends on the design. Like my E10 design, it's dead center with the top. It won't flip as hard as one of these because you have more leverage here. You have a longer arc length for that flipper. You see where it moves in. So basically you have almost an inch of movement there, where the A10, my A10 series, or the A15 even, only has about 3/4 of an inch. So you got another 1/4 inch of movement that gives you a little more power. Not to say that it's not going to flip well, it's just you have to adjust the detent and the lock pressure accordingly to account for that. So you can almost go a little lighter detent pressure on this one just because that flipper is so much further forward of the pivot. But just a teaser for you guys. Now, I'm by no means flipping that very hard. I'm just throwing it out there. This one's not completely finished or anything, as I said, but bearings still need to be broken in, but you can just barely hear them in there. I'll set the detent a little tighter. but flips good. See how fast we can get it. It's like a switchblade. I don't know why they make switchblades legal when you can do these. Kind of silly. So there you go. Number 1 Mini. Just needs finish work. On to the next one. Thanks, guys.